My name is Nour. I'm co-founder and director of the Center for Transnational Development and Collaboration. And I had a plan in mind for this talk, but now I changed that, so bear with me.
Good on time.
Okay, good. So transnational is because we like to transcend national and ethnic boundaries. And this is what we try to do throughout our work. The center was established 3 years ago, and we are registered in the UK and we're registered in Palestine. I'm Palestinian from Jerusalem. And we do work in Turkey with Syrians and Kurdish Syrians. We do work in Jordan, we do work in Tunisia, in Palestine, and in the UK with marginalized communities like refugees and asylum seekers. I would like to start, following the papers I've heard so far and the talks I've heard so far, I would like to start with the problematization of the history of the United Nations. Because as a Palestinian, Mark talked about using the term indigenous, and I think even using the term indigenous as Palestinians does not and did not work when we talk about rights and human rights. And the other thing I would like us to start thinking about is problematizing the concepts of minority versus majority. Because this concept in itself is deceptive. If we look at the situation in Syria, actually, the minority was the dominant one, and it was the political majority. So sometimes, and this is a huge problem for Syrian rebels now, basically talking about their oppression, with them being part of a numerical majority, is problematic for the international community because the Alawites are being perceived as a minority, despite the fact that they are in power. And I'd also like to say that the issue when we talk about human rights is that we talk about universal human rights. We talk about us being together, about human beings being together and not being different. So human rights, in a way or another, if we think about it critically, is an eraser of ethnic and national identities. And the way it should operate is by basically assimilating all the people to abide by specific sets of rules. Unfortunately, this is not what, for me personally, the United Nations stands for, because it feels like it stopped at a point where it stopped recognizing more nations. Some people managed to qualify as nations, others failed. And when we talk about ethnicity and social media, my background is I have a PhD in sociology, and I did my research on the Circassians in Jordan. And when I started on the premise that Circassians in Jordan are perceived to be very well integrated into the community. Many of them are in good governmental positions in Jordan. Many of them are very well established traders. And this is how I started. But actually looking deep into the situation, what we see does not necessarily mean their integration. Because integration can be split to different types. Like we have political integration, we have social integration, economic integration, and other aspects of integration that we need to look at. What was really striking was the fact that if in my research I found out that the younger Circassians felt more strongly towards Circassia than the older generation Circassians. And this was due to a lot of factors. One of these factors is, of course, the emergence of social media, globalization, and how the world has become so well interconnected and interdependent. Like, if we look at the world now, we can literally set one foot in a country each. So the social media helped the younger generations to reconnect with their homeland, which is in the Caucasus region. This reconnection has created a new form of identity that is Jordanian, yet at the same time inconsistent with the Jordanian Arab identity in the region. And it also, and the problem with all of this, with the social media, even though it's great that people feel that they can connect to other countries and they can connect to other nations, the problem is this creates a process of disintegration from the place where the group is based now. And within this process of disintegration, we also see that levels of conservatism, levels of discrimination against women, oppression of women increase. What I found out from my research actually with the Circassians and the Kurds is that gender relations are often used as markers of boundaries. So for example, and especially when talking about, I'll give examples from my research for this. So the Circassian community used to refer to the other Arab as very sexist, very homophobic. The other Arab is always portrayed in terms that show that the way that they treat their women is very different from the way we treat our women. So Circassians felt superior because most of the men I interviewed said, we respect women more than the Arabs respect women. Even though this is not true, but this is also very related to the history of colonization of the region and the Orientalist discourse of the Arab women being secluded and erotic and very far removed from the public sphere. When you look deep into gender relations within these contexts, you see that actually the stereotypes Circassians and Kurdish people use don't mean that their women are better treated. I have interviewed many victims of women victims of domestic violence, and I could not see a huge difference in terms of the way women were being treated. And actually what was really interesting in the Circassian case is there is a very strict age segregation. There is a feel that the young Circassians should respect the elders. And when they used to talk about their relationships with their parents, most of my interviewees said that they were closer to their mothers than their fathers. And when we talked about it more, they said that their fathers are older. So the woman is placed in a position that is of the same level as her children. And yeah, so what I'd really like to highlight is ethnicity and nationalism can play a role in marginalizing women rather than anything. And it's tricky sometimes when we want to prove that we have group boundaries, when we want to prove that we belong to one nation, to one ethnicity, we're different from the dominant majority. We're also marginalizing other voices because these narratives are often portrayed in heterosexual, heteronormative terms, not taking into consideration the people who do not fit within these frameworks and not taking into consideration people who do not fit within gender binaries. Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry to be very pessimistic about social media and the use of social media, but I think we do have a huge problem in terms of voices from the Middle East being marginalized, and in terms of who controls the United Nations, because who funds the United Nations? If we look at history, I mean, there are so many stories and documented human rights abuses that would definitely pass in the International Criminal Court that are not being taken into consideration. I'm currently working, as part of my work, we're working with a group of Syrian lawyers and doctors who do medical and legal documentation of human rights abuses. And when these cases get finalized, they get sent to the United Nations Commission of Inquiry. But nothing is happening to address the issue of human rights abuses in Syria. And I want us to think critically also, because if we look at, I mean, the Armenian genocide was definitely recognized internationally. Meanwhile, the Circassian genocide was never recognized internationally. So what I'm trying to say I don't want to disappoint you and say these things don't work. Like, activism does work, but we should not get distracted by social media, because the role social media is playing now is like anesthesia. Let's post this post. Like, it's easy. Press and share. It's very easy, but it does not act. It has not shown that it effectively influenced change. And that's it. Thank you.